The low thrum of the Onyx Lounge was a familiar symphony of clinking glasses and muted conversations. Avery Johnson ran a hand over the cool, polished surface of the small table, her fingers tracing the dark grain of the wood. It was her third blind date in as many months, a fact she found more exhausting than hopeful. Her friend, Chloe, was an eternal optimist. Avery was a pragmatist. 2 years since the accident, and pragmatism was the only thing that felt real. The metal of her wheelchair was a constant, solid presence, a part of her new anatomy. She checked her phone again. Mark, the accountant Chloe had sworn was the one, was 10 minutes late. She took a slow sip of her club soda, the bubbles fizzing against her tongue. The bar was designed for intimacy, with pools of soft light illuminating small tables and leaving the rest in shadow. It was the kind of place where secrets felt safe. That was when the air in the room shifted. It wasn't a sound or a sudden movement, but a change in pressure, a subtle realignment of energy. The bartender, who had been laughing a moment before, straightened his spine. The low hum of conversation seemed to dip a fraction of a decibel. Avery looked toward the entrance. He stood there for only a second, but it was enough. He was tall, encased in a Tom Ford suit the color of a thundercloud, tailored so precisely it looked more like a second skin than fabric. His hair was black, cut sharp and clean, and his face was a collection of severe, beautiful angles. He didn't look at anyone, yet he seemed to see everything. The room bent around him, a silent acknowledgement of power. He moved, not with a walk, but with a predatory grace that consumed the space between the entrance and the bar. 2 other men, dressed in similar dark suits but lacking his potent stillness, flanked him at a respectful distance. Avery told herself to look away. Men like that were a different species, operating in a world she had no interest in visiting. They were beautiful disasters, the kind you admired from the safety of a television screen. But her eyes stayed on him as he surveyed the room, his gaze sweeping over the patrons with a cool, dismissive assessment. Then his eyes landed on her table for 2, with its 1 occupant. He changed course. His 2 shadows remained by the bar as he approached her table, each step silent and deliberate on the plush carpet. He stopped before her, casting a long shadow that swallowed the warm light on her table. The scent of expensive cologne, something clean and sharp with a note of cedar and smoke, reached her. His eyes, a dark, fathomless brown, flickered from her face down to her wheelchair, then back up. A ghost of a smile, thin and humorless, touched his lips. "You must be my blind date," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that was somehow more menacing than a shout. The joke was cheap, a casual dismissal of her reality. It was meant to put her in her place, the lone disabled woman in a room full of polished people. A year ago it might have stung. Tonight it was just inefficient. She felt a spark of defiance, a familiar flame that had served her well since the day she'd woken up in a hospital bed unable to feel her legs. She held his gaze, refusing to be the first to look away. She let the silence stretch, a small act of rebellion. Then she gave him a slow, deliberate once-over, mirroring his own assessment of her. "Let's see," she began, her voice steady and clear. "My date's name is Mark. He's an accountant who, according to his profile, enjoys hiking and craft beer. You." She paused, letting her eyes travel up the immaculate line of his suit to the severe set of his jaw. "Look like you have people who handle your accountants. You move like you own the air in this room, and the watch on your wrist probably costs more than my car. So no. I don't think you're Mark." The man's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. The flicker of amusement was gone, replaced by a focused, analytical intensity. He was seeing her now, not just as an obstacle or an object of pity, but as a person. The corner of his mouth twitched, the humorless smile gone completely. He had expected compliance or a flustered denial. He had not expected a clinical breakdown of his own persona. Before he could respond, the world exploded. The sound was deafening, a percussive blast of shattering glass as the lounge's entire front window imploded inward. Screams tore through the air, sharp and panicked. Avery's training as a paralegal, the endless hours of sorting facts from chaos, kicked in. Her mind went into overdrive, processing the scene in fractured snapshots. Men in black tactical gear pouring through the broken window. The glint of steel. The distinct, terrifying pop-pop-pop of silenced pistols. The man in the Tom Ford suit, the man who was not Mark, moved with impossible speed. He didn't dive for cover. He didn't run. He became the calm center of the storm. In one fluid motion, he flipped their small, heavy table onto its side, creating a makeshift barricade. In the next, his hand was on the back of her wheelchair, pulling her behind it just as a bullet whizzed past where her head had been, embedding itself in the padded leather of the booth behind her with a sickening thud. His body shielded hers, his presence a wall of solid muscle and expensive fabric. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice a low growl right next to her ear, the warmth of his breath a strange, intimate contrast to the violence erupting around them. His two men were already in motion, drawing weapons of their own from beneath their jackets. The fight was brutal, efficient, and horrifyingly quiet. It wasn't the wild spray of bullets from a movie. It was a series of precise, calculated movements. A grunt, a thud, the slide of a magazine being reloaded. Avery pressed herself against the cold metal of her chair, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could smell cordite and fear, a metallic, acrid scent that filled her lungs. The man in front of her moved with a lethal grace she'd never witnessed. He'd produced a handgun from an unseen holster, and he used it not with anger, but with the detached precision of a surgeon. 2 shots, 2 assailants dropping without a sound. He was a creature of violence, born to this bloody choreography. It was over in less than 30 seconds. Silence descended, thick and heavy, punctuated by the panicked whimpers of the other patrons hiding under tables. The man straightened up, his suit somehow still immaculate. He holstered his weapon and surveyed the damage, his expression unreadable. His gaze fell on Avery, still huddled behind the overturned table. The analytical look was back, but now it was laced with something else. Annoyance. Complication. One of his men approached, speaking in a low, urgent tone. They were Choi's men, amateurs. This was a message. The man, the boss, she realized with a sickening lurch in her stomach, nodded curtly. His eyes were still on her. She was a witness, a civilian who had seen his face, his methods. A loose end. He crouched down in front of her, his movements fluid. He was so close she could see the faint, silvery line of a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. "What is your name?" he asked. The question was not a pleasantry. It was a demand for information. "Avery Johnson," she said, her voice betraying a tremor she hated. He absorbed this, his dark eyes searching her face. "Avery Johnson," he repeated, and the way he said her name was different. It sounded like an ownership claim, a label he was affixing to her. "You are a liability." He stood and turned to his other man. "Get the car. We're leaving. Bring her." The order was absolute. There was no room for argument. The man nodded, moving to clear a path. Avery's mind raced. Police. She needed to talk to the police. But the look in the boss's eyes told her that the police were the last people he wanted involved. And whatever power he wielded, it was clearly the kind that operated far outside the law. The first man came to her wheelchair. "Ma'am," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I'm not going anywhere with you," Avery said, her hands gripping her wheels. It was a foolish thing to say, a child's defiance in the face of a tidal wave, but the words came out anyway. The boss turned back, a flicker of impatience crossing his features. He walked back to her, and this time, he didn't crouch. He loomed. "The men who just tried to kill me saw your face. They now believe you are with me. If you stay here, they will come back for you. When they do, they will not be as inefficient. You can come with me and live, or you can stay here and wait for them. The choice is yours, but you have about 30 seconds to make it." His logic was cold, brutal, and inescapable. He wasn't saving her. He was managing a problem. She was the problem. The distant wail of sirens began to cut through the night, growing steadily closer. That sound, which should have been a comfort, now felt like a countdown. She looked at the bodies on the floor, at the calm, lethal certainty in the man's eyes. Her world, the one with late accountants and meddling friends, had just evaporated. "Fine," she whispered, the word tasting like ash. He gave a slight nod, a gesture of victory. He bent down, and without a word, he righted the table, then smoothly took control of her wheelchair, his large, warm hands covering her own on the push rims. The contact sent a jolt through her, an unwelcome spark of awareness. He pushed her toward the back exit, his men flanking them, a silent, deadly procession moving through a scene of carnage. The old Avery Johnson, paralegal and pragmatist, was left behind in the wreckage of the Onyx Lounge. The woman being wheeled into the cold Los Angeles night belonged to him now, whether she liked it or not. The car was a black, obscenely expensive sedan with windows so dark they looked like polished obsidian. The interior smelled of rich leather and his cologne. The ride was silent, a cocoon of tension moving through the glittering city. Avery stared out the window, watching the familiar streets of Koreatown blur into an alien landscape. She was in his world now, a place of silent men and sudden violence. They arrived at a sleek high-rise that scraped the sky, its glass facade reflecting the city lights like 1,000 captured stars. The private elevator opened directly into a penthouse that was less a home and more a monument to wealth and power. It was all clean lines, dark wood, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the sprawling city below. It was beautiful and sterile, a cage gilded in chrome and marble. He left her in the center of the vast living room, the wheels of her chair silent on the gleaming floor. "Minjun will show you to a room. Do not try to leave. You will not succeed." With that, he was gone, disappearing down a long hallway without a backward glance. Minjun, one of the men from the bar, was polite but firm. He led her to a guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment. It was luxurious, impersonal, and a prison. For 2 days, Avery existed in a state of suspended animation. Food appeared. The door remained locked from the outside. She had no phone, no laptop, no connection to the world she had lost. She spent hours by the window, watching the city breathe, feeling more disconnected from it than ever before. On the 3rd day, he appeared. He entered her room without knocking, holding a slim tablet. He was dressed in a simple black sweater and dark trousers, the casual attire somehow making him seem even more dangerous. "I ran a background check on you, Avery Johnson," he said, his voice as calm as still water. "Paralegal. Top of your class at UCLA Law. You specialize in complex litigation research. Your parents are retired teachers in Sacramento. 2 years ago, you were in a car accident caused by a drunk driver. The driver was the son of a state senator and received no jail time." He recited the facts of her life as if they were items on a balance sheet. Hearing them from his lips felt like a violation. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice tight. "I want to know what you're going to do," he said, taking a step closer. "When I let you go, you'll be questioned. By the police. By others. What will you tell them?" "The truth," she said. "That a gunfight broke out, and a man I didn't know got me out of there." He studied her, his gaze unnervingly perceptive. "You are a good liar. But there are people who are very good at seeing through lies." He paused. "The men who attacked the bar are part of the Choi family. They are my rivals. As long as they believe you are mine, you are a target. My protection is the only thing keeping you alive." "I am not yours," she shot back, the words sharp. A flicker of something, not anger, but perhaps surprise, crossed his face. "No," he said slowly. "You are not. You are a complication." He turned to leave. "What's your name?" she called out, the question surprising even herself. He stopped at the door, his back to her. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke. "Kwon Jihan." He left, and the name hung in the air. Kwon Jihan. It sounded like power. It sounded like a death sentence. Later that evening, Minjun brought her dinner. But instead of the usual gourmet fare, it was a simple container of bibimbap from a small restaurant she knew well, her favorite comfort food. A place she'd mentioned in passing to Chloe 100 times. How could he know that? She realized with a jolt that his background check must have been more than just a search of public records. He had dug into her life, into her conversations. He was listening. The gesture, meant perhaps as a small kindness, felt like a tightening of the leash. She was eating by the window when she saw it on the news, playing on a massive television in the living room she could just see from her open door. A grainy security photo of one of the shooters from the Onyx Lounge. The police were calling it a gang-related shooting. They had no idea. But Avery knew. She knew the man in that photo had seen her.
Jihan was right.
Leaving here wasn't an escape. It was suicide. That was the moment she made the choice. She couldn't leave.
Not yet. She had to stay, to survive.
It was a deliberate decision, a step from which there was no return. That night, she couldn't sleep. She wheeled herself into the main living area, drawn by the silent city lights. The penthouse was dark, save for the ambient glow from outside. She didn't realize he was there until he spoke from the shadows. "You should be sleeping." Jihan was standing by the window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He was just a silhouette against the city, but his presence filled the cavernous room. "So should you," she replied, moving closer. They stood in silence for a while, two strangers bound by violence, watching the city that never slept. On a small table near him, there was a single, framed photograph. It was of a young woman with a bright, joyful smile and eyes that were the same dark, intense shape as his. "Who is she?" Avery asked softly. Jihan's posture tightened. "My sister."
Mina.
The name was spoken with a quiet reverence that was at odds with his cold demeanor. "She was beautiful." "She was," he said, his voice flat. "She was killed 5 years ago. A car bomb. It was meant for me." And there it was.
His wound.
The ghost that haunted this gilded cage. He had failed to protect his sister, and now, Avery understood the fierce, almost suffocating possessiveness of his protection. He wasn't just managing a liability. He was trying to rewrite history. He was trying to save the ghost of Mina by keeping Avery alive. The revelation settled between them, heavy and unspoken. He turned from the window to face her, his eyes unreadable in the dim light. He was closer than she expected. She could feel the warmth radiating from his body, smell the faint scent of whiskey on his breath. "The Choi family will not stop," he said, his voice low. "They know I have a weakness now." "I'm not your weakness," she said, her chin lifting. "I'm a witness." "To them," he said, taking a step closer until he was towering over her chair. "There is no difference." His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. The space between them crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with the man and woman they were, stripped of circumstance. He said her name, a near whisper. "Avery." It was not a question.
It was a statement.
A recognition of the unchangeable fact that she was here, in his life, and neither of them knew how to get her out. That was the moment she knew she was in more danger than she could possibly imagine, and not just from the Choi family. The next move from the Choi family was more insidious. They couldn't breach Jihan's fortress, so they attacked the life Avery had left behind. Her former boss called her, his voice a mix of fury and disappointment. An anonymous tip had been sent to the firm, complete with fabricated documents, accusing her of selling confidential client information. She was fired, her professional reputation shattered. Then came a call to her parents, a vaguely threatening message from a blocked number asking if their daughter was safe. Avery felt the walls of her old world crumbling to dust.
Jihan had been right.
The Choice were systematically erasing her, isolating her, until the only person she had left was him. The realization was terrifying. She was sitting in the sterile opulence of the penthouse, watching her life burn from a distance, and the only person who could put out the fire was the man who started it. Jihan found her after the call with her parents. Her composure, the one thing she'd clung to, had finally cracked. He saw the unshed tears in her eyes, the tremor in her hands. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply took the phone from her hand and listened to the saved voicemail. His expression turned to granite. "They will pay for this," he said, the words a cold promise. He moved her to a new location that night, a nondescript but heavily fortified safe house in the hills, far from the glittering visibility of the penthouse. The gilded cage was replaced by a concrete bunker. It was there she crossed a line she could never uncross. Jihan was dealing with an internal problem. One of his lieutenants, a man named Park, was suspected of being the mole who had leaked her location to the Choice. Avery overheard the interrogation. It was brutal. Park swore his innocence, but the evidence against him was damning. Jihan was preparing to deliver his own brand of justice. But something Park said, a detail about a shell corporation, snagged in Avery's memory. It connected to a case she had researched months ago, a complex web of real estate fraud. On a hunch, using a secure laptop Jihan had provided for her to keep her mind occupied, she started digging. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, her legal training a weapon in this new battlefield. She found it, a public property transfer record, buried deep in city archives. It proved the Shell Corporation wasn't owned by Park, but by another of Jihan's trusted men, a quiet enforcer named Kim. Kim had framed Park to cover his own betrayal. She printed the document. Her heart hammered as she wheeled herself to the room where Jihan stood over a beaten and bloody Park, a gun resting on the table. "Stop," she said, her voice ringing with an authority she didn't feel. Every head in the room turned to her. Jihan's eyes narrowed. "Avery, leave." "No," she said, pushing forward until she was beside him. She held out the paper. "You're about to kill the wrong man. Park is innocent. It's Kim. He's the traitor." She laid out the evidence, her voice clear and concise, the way she would in a legal briefing. She connected the dots with irrefutable logic, using the law as a scalpel to dissect their world of lies. The room was silent, the only sound her steady voice. When she finished, Jihan took the paper from her hand. He read it, his face a mask of cold fury. He looked from the document to Kim, who had gone pale. The betrayal was real, and Avery had exposed it. Jihan didn't thank her. He simply nodded once, a gesture of grim acknowledgement. Justice was swift and terrible for Kim. Park's life was spared. Later, after the bloody aftermath had been cleaned away, Jihan came to her. He stood before her, the faint scent of antiseptic clinging to him. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you interfere?" "I'm a paralegal," she said simply. "I believe in evidence. You are about to execute a man based on a lie." "This is not a courtroom," he countered, his voice rough. "In my world, we don't have the luxury of doubt." "Maybe you should," she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. He stared at her for a long time, the silence stretching between them. She had not only saved an innocent man, she had shown him a flaw in his own absolute system. She had proven herself not as a liability, but as an asset. A dangerous, intelligent, morally complicated asset. He reached out, his fingers gently touching her cheek. The gesture was shockingly tender. "You see things," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You see the truth behind the lies. No one in my life does that. They see power or money or fear. You see people." He let his hand drop, a muscle working in his jaw. "I told myself keeping you here was a matter of strategy. A way to manage a problem." His eyes locked on hers, dark and intense. "I was lying to myself. It was not a declaration of love. It was something far more dangerous. It was a confession of truth, an admission of a connection he could no longer deny." He was seeing her, not as a ghost of a sister, not as a complication, but as Avery. And in that moment, she knew that her choice to stay had sealed her fate in more ways than one. The war with the Choice was external, but the war for her own soul, for who she was becoming in this dark, violent world, had just begun. The final confrontation was inevitable. Jihan's network had located the head of the Choi family, holed up in a private marina, preparing to flee the country. Jihan's plan was simple and brutal, a direct assault to end the war for good. He told Avery to stay at the safe house, surrounded by his best men.
He would handle it.
No, she said, stopping him as he prepared to leave. Over the past week, she hadn't been idle. She hadn't just been a protected guest. She had been working, using her research skills to dig into every aspect of Choi's empire. You're going in blind. You're attacking his fortress. But his real power isn't there. It's here. She turned her laptop toward him. On the screen was a complex flowchart of offshore accounts, encrypted servers, and legitimate businesses, all funneling money for the Choi organization. It was his financial heart. And Avery had found a vulnerability. He has a digital ledger, she explained, her voice quick and precise. It's his failsafe, the record of every bribe, every payoff, every politician in his pocket. If that ledger leaks, his entire empire, criminal and legitimate, will be dismantled by federal indictments, not bullets. It's a cleaner, more absolute victory. Jihan looked at the screen, then at her. He saw the fierce intelligence in her eyes, the unyielding competence. She wasn't asking for permission. She was presenting a superior strategy. I can get past the first 2 firewalls, she said. But the final encryption is biometric. You have to get his thumbprint on a scanner and upload it. Your tech team can link my system to a portable unit. He was silent for a long moment, the weight of her proposal settling in the room. She was offering him a way to win without a bloodbath, but it required him to trust her, to make her an active participant in the battle, to make her his partner. It's too dangerous, he said, his voice low. They will be looking for you. They're looking for a woman in a wheelchair to rescue, she countered. They're not looking for the person who's about to bankrupt them from a keyboard 100 miles away. Let me fight with the weapons I have, Jihan. The use of his name, so stark and familiar, hung between them. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not a victim of circumstance, but a queen moving her pieces on the board. He gave a single, sharp nod. The plan was changed. The climax was a symphony of controlled chaos. Jihan's team hit the marina, a loud, violent distraction. As bullets flew, a small, elite unit infiltrated Choi's private yacht. Miles away, Avery sat with Jihan's top cybersecurity expert, her eyes glued to lines of code, her fingers a blur on the keyboard. She breached the outer layers of Choi's financial security, tearing down firewalls with a surgical precision that left the tech expert breathless. "We're in," she announced into her headset, her voice calm despite the adrenaline singing in her veins. "I'm at the biometric lock. I need the print.
Now."
On the yacht, Jihan cornered a stunned Choi. The fight was short and brutal. Jihan subdued him, pressing the older man's thumb onto the small scanner his man held. "It's done," he grunted into his comms. On Avery's screen, the final lock clicked open. The ledger, a poison pill of data, was hers. With a final keystroke, she sent encrypted copies to the FBI, the SEC, and 3 major news outlets. The Choi empire was over. It was then that a stray piece of intel came through Jihan's comms. A dying Choi loyalist had given up the location of their primary hacker team, who had been trying to trace Avery's signal. They were in a van less than a mile from the safe house. Jihan's blood ran cold. "Avery, get out of there. They're coming for you." But it was too late. She heard the screech of tires outside, the sound of heavy boots on gravel. The tech expert drew his weapon, pushing her toward a reinforced back room. But Avery shook her head. She wasn't going to hide. She grabbed the heaviest object on the desk, a solid-state hard drive, and wheeled herself behind the door, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The door burst open. A man stormed in, gun raised. Before he could even register the room was empty, Avery swung the hard drive with all her might, smashing it against the side of his head. He crumpled to the floor, stunned. Her guard took down the second man. It was over. She sat there, panting, the heavy metal drive still in her hand, a warrior in her own right. She had not been rescued. She had held her ground. When Jihan returned, he had a fresh gash on his arm, stitched crudely, and a darkness in his eyes she'd never seen before. He saw the downed men, the hard drive on her lap, and the defiant look on her face. He walked to her, ignoring everyone else, and knelt before her wheelchair. He gently took the hard drive from her hands and set it aside. His fingers traced the line of her jaw, his touch surprisingly gentle. The cost of their victory was clear. His body was wounded. Her old life was not just gone, it was a ghost. She could never go back. My father taught me that loyalty was the only currency that mattered in our world, he said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. He was wrong. He looked directly into her eyes, and the final wall around his heart seemed to crumble. Certainty matters more. And I am certain of you, Avery. It was not a proposal. It was not a declaration. It was an acknowledgement. A statement of fact that bound them more tightly than any vow. He was hers and she was his. Weeks later, they stood on the balcony of the penthouse, the city lights a carpet of scattered diamonds below. The Choi Empire was a ruin of indictments and scandal. Jihan's territory was secure, absolute. Her name had been cleared, the fabricated evidence against her exposed as part of the Choi conspiracy, but she could never return to that life. He stood behind her, his hands resting on the back of her chair, a silent, possessive weight. The night air was cool against her skin. She looked at their reflections in the dark glass of the balcony door. The woman in the chair, her expression calm and unreadable, and the man standing behind her, a king in his castle, his shadow covering hers. He didn't ask her to stay. He didn't need to. This dangerous, beautiful, violent world was her home now. She had not fallen into it. She had chosen it. Avery reached back, her fingers finding his hand, lacing through his. His grip tightened, a silent answer, a promise. It wasn't a surrender. It was an alliance, an acceptance of the woman she had become, and the man who saw her not as broken, but as whole. They were two fractured pieces that, against all odds, had found a way to fit together, creating a new, unbreakable reality in the heart of the city that was now their kingdom.